Good morning. How are we this morning? Somebody's woo, and a lot of people are good. That's exciting. My name's Jake. I'm one of the pastors on the team here. Excited to be with you. You know, New Life is one church in multiple locations. We've got 3 locations, and so I'm excited about all that God is doing at New Life East and New Life Whitehall and New Life Gehanna. And those of you who are joining us online, I'm excited that you are here. And listen, ready or not, Christmas is upon us, right? It's here. Like some of you get mad when, you see Christmas decorations in the stores in August. I understand that anger. Some of you Scrooges even mock your friends when they put Christmas decorations up in their own houses, even a day before Thanksgiving. But all that's past. Christmas is here. Christmas season is here. I love the Christmas season. I love just about everything about it. I love my kids in PJs opening presents. I love Christmas trees and Christmas lights. And I like hot chocolate and candy canes. And we eat sausage balls. I don't know if you guys do that. Pumpkin bread. I like all of that. Christmas cookies. Love them. All right, I love the Christmas season. I like choosing gifts for the people that I get to give gifts to. I love that part of it. And I love the Christmas story of Jesus' birth. I mean, think of it this way, a worldwide birthday party for Jesus. That his family is invited to, right? Sure, that makes sense. But also a lot of guests of the family are going to show up too. Tons of them. And many of them don't even know Jesus, but they're celebrating his birth. Isn't that crazy? I love Christmas. I love the Christmas story. And if you grew up in church or you're in a family that is intentional about pointing the craziness of the Christmas season back to the Christ at the center of Christmas, the Christmas story is probably a familiar one, right? At least the basics, Mary and Joseph, and there's a manger and swaddling cloths and some wise men and a shepherd and angels, and you got evil King Herod trying to stop it all. I love the Christmas story. I love the fulfillment. I love the hope that it brings, that it reminds us of. And maybe you haven't noticed this, but in the Christmas story, as it's told in the Bible, there are 4 times where an angel delivers messages to a person or a group of people. 4 times. And you know what they say each time they deliver those messages? Anybody know? Fear not. Do not fear. Don't be afraid. Now, angels are probably scary, right? So that kind of makes sense. Like if they were terrifying and like, oh gosh, somebody just, even if you thought it was a person, if they just appeared, it would be kind of freaky, right? So you'd be scared and they would say, don't be scared. And that kind of makes sense. But I think it's more than just that. I think the messages that the angels were delivering were scary in and of themselves to the people that they were delivering them to, the receivers of those messages. I think they were scary, like what they were supposed to do or what the news was that they were delivering. And yet, every single angel said, do not be afraid. The first time that happens in the Christmas story is actually before Mary and Joseph, before the manger and the swaddling cloths and the wise men and the shepherds and all of that. It's before all of that. And it's in Luke chapter 1. If you have your Bible, you can grab it and head over to Luke chapter 1. I said I love Christmas, and I do, but you know what I hate about Christmas? The waiting. I hate the waiting. Like I remember when I was a kid thinking that the time between decorating our house for Christmas and Christmas actually getting here was like an eternity. I mean, it just felt like forever. And I would ask my mom, can we open gifts? She'd say no. And it was worse that she kept adding these gifts through this time under the tree, And I remember at 6 or 7 thinking, I'm never going to get to open these gifts. This is a big trick. I'm never going to get to open them. My mom said, we can't open them now, Jakey. We got to wait till Christmas. We got to wait till Christmas. So I did what every semi-good kid does. I tried to figure out what was in the boxes, you know what I mean? I tried to figure it out because I had asked for something specific, and I wasn't sure that my parents were going to deliver. I had doubt that my parents or Santa would deliver what I had asked for. And sometimes, most of the time I would just shake the boxes, you know what I mean? But my mom was shady. And she would put like pennies in there and rocks and whatever else. And so, I could never tell based on shaking the box. Most of the time I would do that. Sometimes the doubt in the waiting would cause in me the unforgivable Christmas sin of peeking. I'm just going to be real. So sometimes I would look for my mom's hiding place where she hid all the presents she hadn't yet wrapped. Other times, I would try to carefully open the edge of the present to try to see if there was anything written on the box that would indicate its contents. And there were a couple of times where I almost unwrapped my presents when my parents were not in the house, thinking I would just look at what's inside and wrap them back up. Like, what's the harm, Thank God I had two older brothers who had made some mistakes. And they told me, Jake, trust us. You're not going to be able to wrap them as good as Mom wrapped them, okay? We've been through this. You're not going to get away from it or get away with it. And so I didn't do that. And also, I didn't want my parents to make good on that yearly Christmas promise, nay, threat, to give away all of my presents to some unnamed good boy that deserved them more than me were I to be caught peeking. So I didn't do it. Waiting is hard. When I was a kid, waiting was hard. Now as an adult, it's even worse. I want to give my kids their presents right now. I'm like, I don't want to wait anymore. And my wife, Erin, is the worst about it. She's just like the kids, all right? She's with the kids saying, Dad, can we open up a present today, please? Please, Dad, just one. They're like, can we open up our presents on Christmas Eve? Can we open up our presents on Christmas Eve? Can we open up our presents on Christmas Eve? It just keeps getting worse and worse each year. Waiting is hard. But really, outside of Christmas presents, waiting is hard, isn't it? Waiting for change. Waiting for restoration and healing, for that grown son or daughter to come back to the family, back to the faith. Waiting for God to do something in your life. Waiting for that healing of the cancer diagnosis that you got years ago or days ago or weeks ago. Waiting for the job to come, the husband or the wife, the baby to come. Waiting for the depression to stop. Waiting for God to intervene. Waiting is hard. What are you waiting on? What promise from God feels forgotten? You may not realize this, but the Christmas story is a story about waiting. Let me show you what I mean. Luke, the gospel writer, doesn't start with Mary and Joseph. Doesn't start with the manger, anything like that. He starts with a different couple. A couple who knows about waiting. And we find them disappointed, but faithful. And really, it's not just them waiting. The whole nation of Israel is waiting. In fact, all of creation is waiting. The waiting goes all the way back to the very beginning. In Genesis, God created Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and they had everything they needed and everything they could ever want because they had God. But there was also a serpent, the devil, Satan, the tempter, the deceiver. And he tempted Adam and Eve. And long story short, they disobeyed God because they doubted his goodness. They thought he was holding out on them. And as a consequence, our first grandparents were pushed out of the Garden of Eden. But in that moment of consequence, God gave them a promise. The promise was that one of your offspring, one of your descendants, one day would crush the head of the serpent and crush sin and crush Satan and sin's effects on our world forever. And that promise became like a flame. And from that day forward in the Old Testament, the flame of God's promise was passed on for thousands of years by his faithful flame bearers, passing on the flame of the promise amidst the darkness of a sinful, fallen world. The promise that one day someone would come, a descendant of Adam and Eve, to save humanity and defeat sin and death once and for all. So in Genesis 6, God chose Noah as a flame bearer. And in Genesis 12, God chose Abraham. And then there's Jacob and Joseph and Moses, Joshua, the judges, King David, the prophets, and hundreds more, all spanning thousands of years, all passing on the promise in the darkness that one day a deliverer would come who became known as the Messiah. And he would come and he would light up the world. One day, God would defeat sin and death. And the flame was passed on over and over and over and over. And with each passing, with each new promise, with each new prophecy, the groaning of the world increased even more. Our yearning and our longing for salvation increased even more. The flame passed on over and over and over and over until suddenly there was this deep and piercing prophetic silence. Almost like God had said enough. Kind of like the silence that comes on a crowd before the show starts. Kind of like the hush that comes on the congregation as they turn, waiting for the bride to enter. And it's into this silence, 4,000 years of waiting, 400 years of silence. This is where we find Zechariah and Elizabeth, but people had started in this silence to doubt, as you would, as I would, to ask the questions, will God deliver on his promises, or has he forgotten us? Will a Messiah really show up? Will he deliver, or has he forgotten us? Have you ever felt that way in your own life? Okay, God, I'm trying to believe you. I'm trying to wait, but I'm struggling. Will you deliver? Will you deliver on your promise, or have you forgotten me? I've definitely been there. That's where the people are. That's where the world is. That's where Zechariah and Elizabeth are personally. Luke 1, verse 5. In the days of Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah of the division of Abijah. And he had a wife from the daughters of Aaron, also the daughters of priests, and her name was Elizabeth. And they were both righteous before God, walking blamelessly in the commandments and statutes of the Lord. But they had no child because Elizabeth was barren, and both were advanced in years. Blameless, but barren, unable to have children. Heartbreaking. If you've walked through infertility yourself or through it with someone else, you know how heartbreaking this can be. Disappointing. They've been waiting. They're advanced in years, meaning they've waited their whole life to the point where it doesn't make any sense to keep waiting for a child because they're past the age to have a kid. Add to that disappointment, the regular disappointment in this barrenness, add to it disgrace, because in Elizabeth's time it was believed that anyone who couldn't have a kid, it was the woman's problem. She was the one that was barren, and theologically they believed that God blessed the righteous and his greatest blessing is kids. And so if you're barren, then you must have something wrong with you that only God knows about, and it's your fault. Disgrace. Blameless, righteous, but barren. Advanced in years beyond any hope of their promise being fulfilled, their hope being fulfilled. It says Zechariah was a priest, and Zechariah was a priest not because he had chosen to be a priest. He was a priest because he was born into a priestly family. And so nobody ever asked Zechariah, what do you want to be when you grow up? Nobody ever asked Zechariah, hey, are you ready to accept a call to ministry? Nobody ever asked him that. He was a priest because of the family he was born into. Elizabeth was also a descendant of Aaron, in other words, in the priestly family. And so when Zechariah and Elizabeth went to a family picnic, every male was a priest. At this time in Israel, there were probably between 10 and 20,000 priests. Lots of priests. And one temple. One temple. And every year, a priest, a singular priest, would be chosen by lot to enter the temple, enter the Holy of Holies, and burn the incense on the altar. 1 out of 10 or 20,000. Many priests, most priests, lived their whole lives never being chosen, never going into the Holy of Holies to offer the sacrifice. And yet Luke 1 says that our Zechariah is chosen. Amongst all those priests, he's chosen. So he consecrates himself, walks into the Holy of Holies of the temple to do his duty. And then verse 11, there appeared to him an angel of the Lord standing on the right side of the altar of incense. And Zechariah was troubled when he saw him, and fear fell upon him. But the angel said to him, do not be afraid. Everybody say, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid, Zechariah, for your prayer has been heard. Now, if the angel had stopped there, Zechariah could have been like, what prayer? Which prayer? I mean, he's a human. He's a priest. He's offered lots of prayers through the years, private and public, personal and prescribed. And so he could be thinking, what prayer is the angel talking about? It says, Zechariah, your prayer has been heard, and your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you shall call his name John. Oh, that prayer. That one. The one we've been praying since we've been married. The one we've been praying our entire adult lives. The one that we gave up on when we got to a certain age where it just wasn't possible for us to have kids. That prayer, that's the one you're talking about. Verse 14, and the angel says, and you will have joy and gladness, and many will rejoice at his birth, for he will be great before the Lord, and he must not drink wine or strong drink, and he'll be filled with the Holy Spirit even from his mother's womb. Now that'll mess with your theology a little bit. And he'll turn many of the children of Israel to the Lord their God, and he will go before him in the spirit and power of Elijah to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children and the disobedient to the wisdom of the just, to make ready for the Lord a people prepared. Whoa. Not just any kid. That kid. Zechariah, as a priest, would totally know what the angel is talking about. In fact, the angel quotes the prophet Isaiah in much of this proclamation. He basically goes, hey, not only will you have a son in your old age, that promise, that thing that you've been believing for but you gave up on a long time ago, not only that, but your son will be the prophesied preparer of the way for the Messiah. Whoa. The angel's not just saying that Zechariah and Elizabeth's wait is over. He's saying the nation of Israel's wait is over. All of creation's wait is over. The flame of the promise has endured for 4,000 years, 400 of that being in total prophetic silence. And now the angel says, it's time. The wait is over. Sin will be defeated. Aren't you excited, Z? Let's go. The day's finally come. He's probably high-fiving. Probably not. It's that kid. The wait is over. Look at Z's response. Verse 18. How shall I know this? For I'm an old man, and my wife is advanced in years. Wah, wah, wah. Like, really? Really, Z? That's your answer. That's your response. How will I know? I mean, there's an angel. He's next to the altar in the Holy of Holies, and you were chosen out of 20,000 priests to be there in that moment, and he just told you, and you're asking how you'll know? Are you kidding me? The angel's response to me, in my sick, twisted humor, is the funniest thing in the Bible. It's verse 19. The angel answered him, I am Gabriel. I stand in the presence of God. I was sent to speak to you and to bring this good news. Zechariah says, how can I be sure that what you're saying is actually going to happen? And the angel goes, because I'm Gabriel. I stand in the presence of God. I was sent to you from God. I thought that was obvious. I'm Gabriel. I'm telling you it's going to happen. That's how you know it's going to happen. Gabriel's going, is that not enough, Zechariah? Gabriel. I feel like he's ticked. Gabriel's ticked. He can't believe the lack of faith in Zechariah. And so look at what he says next. He says, and behold is just another word for look. And so I feel like the angel's going like, look, dude. Look. You'll be silent and unable to speak until the day that these things take place because you did not believe my words, which will be fulfilled in their time. He goes, I'm Gabriel. Hello? Angel standing before you in the Holy of Holies. Never mind. You know what? I guess I'm not good enough. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to smite you. I'm going to smite you mute until your son is born. That's all I'm going to do. Smite. And so Zechariah can't speak. It's hilarious to me. I don't know about you guys. But have you ever felt like this, like Zechariah feels? Like no matter how many signs and reassurances you get, it's still hard to believe what God is saying. I'm going to give it a second. Just because, they may want to hear the message, you know what I mean? And I'd be totally fine. They can just put it on speaker, you know what I mean? They probably need it. Have you ever felt like Zechariah feels in this moment? That no matter how many assurances or promises from God or signs you get, you still have this doubt. Zechariah doubted in the face of an angel. And honestly, I get it. Because sometimes, to me, doubt feels safer. Almost like if I doubt, then I won't have to deal with disappointment. Like if I keep my expectations low, I'll always be surprised in a good way when stuff happens. Like it protects us, doubt does, from disappointment. But the truth is, doubt never protects. It only silences us. This whole time in Luke chapter 1, people are outside of the temple praying as Zechariah goes in, as was the custom, as they did every single year. And they start to wonder where Zechariah is and why he hasn't come out. And he finally comes out and he starts to try to talk to him, but he can't speak. And so he's making signs, and they finally figure out, they think he's had a vision in the Holy of Holies at the altar. And there's this vision that's happened, and 400 years of silence, 4,000 years of waiting. People had long begun to wonder, will God actually fulfill his promise? Will he deliver on his promises? And an angel shows up in the Holy of Holies, and with his first words, do not fear, he shatters 400 years of silence and stops, brings an end to 4,000 years of waiting. And listen, he says it all to a guy named Zechariah. And Zechariah literally means God has remembered again. Do not be afraid, because God has remembered his promise. What are you waiting on? What promise? You feel like it's too late. God is not going to deliver on this. Maybe I was wrong about this promise. What have you stopped praying about? What has God said that you now doubt? Think about this. It's one thing to believe in God. It's another thing entirely to believe God. To believe that his promises are true, that he's going to do what he said he was going to do. That it's another thing entirely to not base my belief, my action, my decisions, my thoughts on what I see in this world, but instead to base my decisions, my actions, my thoughts on what God has said. That's different. To have faith that God does not forget. Waiting is hard. I love Christmas, but I hate the waiting. I love having 6 kids, but you guys know how hard it is when everybody's trying to get their shoes on, and I hate waiting on them. You know what I mean? I'm just kidding. That's not where I was going with that. I got 6 kids, and you guys know if you have kids or people that you're spiritual mentors to or whatever, you have some stuff you're waiting on, some stuff that you're believing for in them, that God is going to do this in them and through him, and you have these dreams and these hopes and maybe some promises from God, and I don't like the waiting. I want to see those things happen sooner rather than later. 4 years ago, my family and I went through some really difficult church hurt, like level 10 church hurt. And it sent us into 4 years of waiting. And let me just tell you, I didn't like it. I did not like the waiting. I liked, now, hindsight, what God taught me in the waiting. I love where it brought me here to you. But I did not like the waiting. What are you waiting on? What are you afraid to hope for? What prayer have you given up on? What promise from God have you let go of? Oftentimes in the waiting, I can easily let doubt and fear creep in. When I'm in a season of waiting, I can let doubt and fear creep in. But here's the thing about that. Doubt and fear often silence me. They silence my prayers. They silence my declarations of faith. They silence my hopes. Zechariah was literally, physically silenced by his doubt and his fear. We can easily be silenced by ours, or at least I can. And it's this cycle because you're afraid and afraid God's not going to show up, and so you doubt. But then you look at your doubt and you think, man, maybe I'm not a Christian. Maybe I don't have much of a faith. I don't have a strong faith, and that causes you to fear, and that fear causes you to doubt again, and it's this vicious cycle over and over and over again. Fear and doubt, they feel like gusts of wind trying to blow out the flame of God's promise, his purpose that's been put on your life, the calling that he's put on your life, the things that he's told you will happen. doubt and fear feel like they'll blow that flame of the promise out. But listen, beloved, it doesn't have to be that way. The truth is, no matter what comes at it, the flame of God's promise is never going to go out. The flame of God's promise will endure. God delivers every single time. That's the key. It's not in finding strength to keep from doubt or keep from fear or figuring out how to stop the wind or stop the storm or stop the cold so that the promise stays alive. It's not that at all. Those things will come. The key is that despite my doubt and fear, God always delivers. Every single time, he always fulfills his promises. Numbers 23, God is not man that he should lie, or son of man that he should change his mind. Has he said, and will he not do it? Or has he spoken, and will he not fulfill it? Joshua 21, not one word of all the good promises that the Lord had made to the house of Israel had failed. All came to pass. 2 Corinthians 1, for all the promises of God find their yes in Christ. Hebrews 10, let us hold fast to the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful. And most importantly, Philippians 1, and I am sure of this, that he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion at the day of Jesus Christ. What I gave you is just a small, sad sampling of all the Bible has to say about this. Doubt and fear may silence us, but it doesn't have to be that way. God always delivers. He always delivers. So faith, then, isn't holding on to the promise with no doubt and no fear. Faith, I should say, is holding on to the promise even though we doubt and fear. It's holding on to the promise through our doubt and our fear, through the struggle, even when we doubt. To trust that the flame will stay lit no matter the wind, no matter the storm. Not because we're strong, but because God is strong. Not because we can count on us, but because we can count on him. Back to Luke chapter 1. Elizabeth, advanced in years, barren beyond any kind of hope of having kids. After the message from angel Gabriel and the silencing and the smiting of Zechariah, does in fact conceive. And so a baby begins to grow in her womb. Imagine the excitement in the village. Like, can you believe it? That old woman is pregnant. I mean, she's 170. How could she have a baby? I don't know, but I can see it. It's growing and growing and growing. And all the time, they're like, hey, Zechariah, what do you think about this? Zechariah is mute. He can't speak. He can't praise God for it. He can't get excited with his voice. Zechariah is silent. We're forced to reflect on the doubt that often rises up in our waiting. And you might think it's kind of harsh. Like, man, one moment of doubt and he gets his voice taken away? Like, that's kind of messed up. But what if this season of silence, in this season of silence, God was trying to use it, was going to use it to bring Zechariah to something greater, some greater faith. Don't you think that as Elizabeth's belly grew, so grew the faith of Zechariah? I mean, he couldn't talk about it, but I bet he prayed about it. I bet he thought about it. I bet he thought about all the words. I bet he had them memorized, all the words that the angel Gabriel had given him concerning his son. Every single word. I bet he clung to the flame of God's promise like his life depended on it, hoping that one day he'd be able to speak again. Because when everything else is stripped away, when even your voice is taken from you, all you have, beloved, is the promise of God, the dependability of God, the faithfulness of our God. It's all you've got. So let me ask you again, what are you waiting on? What prayer have you stopped praying because you waited too long and you just couldn't wait any longer? Where has fear and doubt silenced you? Maybe it's been so long you're not even sure the promise was real. You're like, I don't even know if that's really was God, or maybe you started to believe that lie that God has forgotten you. But he hasn't. He can't. He won't. Fast forward a few months. Elizabeth gives birth. Joy erupts. Friends and family come. But there's this moment of tension when it comes to naming the child. I don't know if you remember this, if you've read this story before. Verse 59. And on the 8th day, they came to circumcise the child, and they would have called him Zechariah after his father, but his mother answered, no, he shall be called John. And they said to her, none of your relatives is called by this name. And they made signs to his father, inquiring what he wanted him to be called. And he asked for a writing tablet, and he wrote, his name is John. And they all wondered. It's like, surely Elizabeth is confused, right? Surely it's not John. Surely you want to call him Zechariah after his father, but Zechariah doesn't hesitate. There's no doubt or fear in him this time. He writes it out. His name is John. And then it says that as soon as he writes that out, he's able to speak again. Imagine it. He's been mute, unable to speak for 9 months as all this has taken place. If you were in his position, what would your first word be? Would your first sentence be something like, finally? Would you complain? God, why? Why did you do that? Why did you keep me silent all these months? Would you offer some half-hearted thing like, well, I hope this works out? It says, and immediately his mouth was opened and his tongue loosed, and he spoke, blessing God. The first words out of his mouth were not frustration, bitterness, even relief. His first words were praise to God. Just imagine the scene. I mean, the man who had been silent for months, whose voice had been stolen by doubt and by fear, now uses his voice to declare the faithfulness of God. The angel's words had shattered 400 years of silence. Zechariah's praise broke his silence. That flame we talked about, the one that was passed down from Noah to Abraham to Jacob and Joseph and Moses and Joshua, the judges, King David, the prophets, it's still burning. God's promise endures. It never goes out. The flame of God's promise never goes out, even when it seems like it flickers a little bit. You know what I'm talking about? When you're stuck in the darkness and you're wondering if maybe there's no light. Maybe there isn't a light at the end of the tunnel. Maybe I'm suffering for no reason. Maybe the promise that I believed that God gave me isn't true. Maybe I cannot count on God. The flame endures. The promise endures. I don't want you to miss this. Zechariah did not keep the flame of God's promise going. He couldn't. He doubted. He feared. He failed. But God wasn't asking him to keep the flame alive. God wasn't asking him to do God's job and fulfill his promises. He wasn't. He was just asking Zechariah to trust in him. And when Zechariah couldn't speak his faith, God allowed him to write it out, which means there's hope for me and you yet. God's not asking me to be perfect. He's just asking me to trust. Faith isn't about never doubting. It's not about keeping the flame steady in our own strength or even anything like that. Faith is about trusting that God's promises stand no matter what. I love Christmas, but I don't love waiting. Waiting is hard. But that's the side of the Christmas story we don't often think about. Christmas is a story about waiting. 4,000 years of it. 400 years of silence, fear, doubt, reigning supreme. And the angel said, do not be afraid. The angel's words, do not be afraid, are God's words to you today. Don't be afraid. God has remembered his promise. You are not forgotten. God's faithfulness hasn't changed. The same God who delivered this promise then is the same God keeping his promises now. He's the same God yesterday, today, and forever. His faithfulness remains steady. The wait is never wasted. The silence is never empty. Because God's faithfulness never fails. Do you believe that? Three of you believe it over here. Do you believe that? Amen. Let's give the Lord some kind of praise to say, I believe in his faithfulness. He's steady, even when I'm not, even when I'm stuck, even when I'm in darkness, even when I feel like this suffering will never end, even when I mess up. Even when doubt and fear threaten to extinguish the flame, God's faithfulness never, ever fails. You can trust him. We can trust him. His steadfast love endures forever. Let's have a moment just to respond to what the Lord's speaking to us. If you would, just close your eyes and bow your heads. We do this at the end of every sermon just because we want you to have a moment to ask the Lord this question. God, what are you speaking to me today? Not, what are you speaking to my spouse so I can tell them later? Not, I wish so-and-so was here so they could hear this, but what are you speaking to me? With our eyes closed and our heads bowed, ask the Lord that question right now. And maybe you would say, man, I've got some promises that I used to believe, but I've given up on them. I stopped praying for them. I stopped declaring them in faith because the waiting just drew out so long and I just gave up. Doubt and fear came in and I stopped believing. As we've talked about promises all day today, maybe you have one of those promises. You know what it is immediately when we started talking about it, or God's bringing it to remembrance right now. If that's you and you're saying, I want God to help me have faith in his promises, to pray these promises like I used to maybe, or maybe it's a new promise that he's giving you right now. If that's you, I want to give you two quick action steps. One is to write down the promises of God that he's giving you. And the other is to tell somebody. Somebody you love, somebody close to you, maybe a spouse, maybe a small group. Tell them the promise that you feel like God has given you, that you're believing God for, and allow them to pray with you and for you. But maybe you're in this room or watching online, and when I said, the angel said, do not be afraid. And that's God's word for you today. Do not be afraid. When I said that, you thought something to the effect of, yeah, that'd be nice. That'd be nice, Pastor, but I don't see that happening. Because yours is a life filled with fear, filled with anxiety. Fear and anxiety about what people think, fear and anxiety about failure, fear and anxiety about trying new things. Fear and anxiety about letting God down or letting someone close to you or being hurt again. Your life is full of fear and anxiety, and if you were honest, you'd say it's a dark, dark room. There's no light in this room. If that's you, I have one job today. I want you to know I've been praying for you. My one job is to open the door of that dark room and show you that there's a way out, and his name is Jesus. If you have yet to surrender to Jesus, I'm not saying your problems will go away. I'm not saying immediately you won't fear or doubt. I'm just saying that Jesus is the hope and the peace that God promised. You're missing out on peace because you're missing out on Jesus. And so if that's you, just in your own words right now, just pray and just say, Jesus, I need you. I need your peace. I need your light. I'm so scared. I'm so anxious. I need you, Jesus. Just give him your fear, give him your anxiety, or try to, and ask him for help in doing it. Tell him, Jesus, I can't fix this. I've tried. I can't fix this. I can't fix my sin. I can't fix my rebellion. I'm like Adam and Eve. I've chosen Satan over you. Help me make the right choice. Change my life. Make me a new creation. Just in your own words, pray and ask the Lord to save you. If that's you, any of those, if you're saying, I'm a follower of Christ, but I'm struggling with fear and doubt, and I want God to come into my life and help me in a bigger way to have faith that overcomes that fear, or trust in his promise even in the midst of that fear. Maybe that's you. Maybe you're saying, I've got a specific promise that God's given me that I've given up on, that I need to rekindle and believe him for. And maybe you want to give your life to Jesus once and for all. Come out of that dark room and start living like he has created you to live. If any of those is you, with our eyes closed and our heads bowed, I would love to pray for you. So would you just slip your hand up so I can see it? Yeah, I see those hands. Yeah, hands going up all over. Hold them up high. Lord, I just pray in Jesus' name for those who have their hands raised, who have maybe some soft hearts to listen to you today, maybe some boldness to step out and obey you. I pray, God, that you would meet them right where they are, that when they lay their fear and their doubt down, that they would feel your presence, that you are with them. You never forsake them. Even in the midst of difficulty, you're right there. Bring to remembrance the promises you've given us that we've laid down and you haven't. And for those who want to give their lives to you, I pray that the seed of your truth, your gospel, finds in their heart good soil, takes root, bears fruit, and their lives are transformed completely from this day forward. It's in Jesus' name that I pray these things. Everybody said?